Our April 24th meeting for the Des Moines Water Works Board of Trustees. We have a consent agenda before us, and I don't believe we have any comments on this, other than I'll be looking for a motion for approval.
So moved. Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Bill, it looks like list of payments and approved expenditures. Was there anything in that regard that you wanted to bring to our attention?
Not this month, so.
Okay. Our next meeting is May 22nd. We'll be in the midst of graduation season by then, won't we? I know everyone's calendars are filling up. Moving ahead, item 3A, and some of these issues, as you know from going over the packet, are interrelated, but A seems to somewhat stand on its own. So, Bill?
It does. Thanks, Sue. Yes, item 3A is our addition of a reverse osmosis skid at the Saylorville water treatment plant. And I think along those lines it may be appropriate. Jennifer Puffer is not here, but Kyle Danley is here. You know, as part of this process that Dan's retirement has triggered a number of different staff development opportunities. Kyle moves into water production as the director of water production, and Jennifer is the director of distribution. Mike is in transition here with many different roles. He will move into Dan's position as Dan retires on around July 1, and Ted will finally get to be able to do real work as Chief Operating Officer. Ted's had some interesting developments in office space as he slugs through a number of different problems, but this particular item coming from water production is one that Kyle has been very much involved in, as well as a number of other folks. You know that the Saylorville water treatment plant is crucial for us and for our northern service territory customers. Unique technologies, but our reverse osmosis process really is the constraint between reverse osmosis and ultrafiltration. So this is adding an additional and a rather expensive technology, additional unit in the technology at Saylorville. You'll see the bidding here that has left us with 3 respondents, some time frames involving the delivery, and then there'll be an additional contract that'll be coming your way on the actual installation of these units. This is for the purchase only. So the staff recommendation here is to appropriate just shy of $500,000 to Wigan Water Technologies for introducing an additional skid of reverse osmosis at the Saylorville Water Treatment Facility. We'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Bill. I'm looking for a motion to authorize staff to issue a purchase order in the amount of $499,384 to Wigan Water Technology for purchase of specified RO equipment.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
Why is the big difference? Is it just...
I'm sorry, the difference among the bidders?
Mm-hmm.
I won't even hazard a guess. Kyle, you want to give it a shot? Kyle won't hazard a guess.
Uh-huh.
We have worked with Wigan before, obviously, and it may be familiarity with our process. Suez, in my experience, is on the high end, not a Rolls Royce, but certainly of a different perception of quality. But there is a significant swing there, David. You'll notice our estimate actually was even a little higher than all 3 of these bids at $810,000. So we're the beneficiary of an unusually positive bidding climate, but Wigan is somebody that we're very comfortable with because they've have done work with us before.
Good.
Any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And I apologize, I jumped right over public comment period, and we do have a guest here that Bill and I had a chance to visit with. Do we have anyone in the audience that would like to speak to the board about anything on the agenda or in general? Well, thank you for being here.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Moving along to item 3B.
Sue mentioned an interrelationship between a number of different items on the agenda, and items 3B, 3C, and 3D are really very much interrelated to the point. If for whatever reason you choose not to pass one, the staff recommendation would be that all three then are withdrawn. We put them in an order here that hopefully will make a little sense as to providing some foundation for the interrelationships. 3B is an agreement between Des Moines Waterworks, the City of Des Moines, and the Des Moines Waterworks Foundation relative to the Ruan Connector underneath Fleur Drive, connecting Des Moines Waterworks Park with Grays Lake Park. The City Council last night unanimously passed this. The Des Moines Waterworks Park Foundation has passed this. We've had discussions at this table about the relationship between the Phase 1 improvements and this separate project. The long and short of that is the Phase 1 improvements have grading assumptions ultimately on how the Ruan Connector would work. If for whatever reason that did not happen, it would certainly change a number of elements within the Phase 1 Des Moines Waterworks Park Foundation improvements. Fortunately, that seems to be very much now on task. That is the Ruan Connector. The only issue that I would point out to you, a data point that might be relevant for you, is because the city has seen a fairly significant change in what they had foreseen might be potential capital improvement plans in the future. The local option sales tax failed, as you know, within the last couple months. That has changed their likely resource devotion on Fleur Drive improvements that were scheduled for next year or the year after. Those now kind of fall off the table. That was important to the Ruan Connector in terms of coordinating how the tunnel would be excavated beneath Fleur Drive. There actually have to be partial closures on Fleur Drive as that happens. We have insisted, and did I see Sam here? Yeah, he's probably still talking with the media on the connector, actually. We had insisted, and the Park Foundation have insisted, that the agreement recognize that we will likely, in working with the general contractor for the Ruan Connector, require those closures next year without regard to what the city is doing in terms of their own ability to do improvements on Fleur Drive. So wanted you to be aware of that. Happy to answer any questions you may have on the Ruan Connector. Dan and our engineering staff, but Dan in particular, and Ted, have been very much involved in the three-party negotiations between the City of Des Moines, the Foundation, and obviously Des Moines Waterworks as your agent. Happy to answer any questions you may have on this, but I do think that this is an important foundation as you move forward now to the Phase 1 recommendations that will be in front of you in B and in C.
So we're looking for a motion to approve and authorize chairperson to execute 28E agreement between Des Moines Waterworks, City of Des Moines, and Des Moines Waterworks Park Foundation for construction of the Fleur Drive Trail Passageway, contingent upon the approval of items 3C and 3D of this agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Any other discussion? I do have a question under maintenance responsibilities, future maintenance, and I know you had mentioned something to me, and I see it regarding liability. Could we just, for the record, make sure we state that?
Happy to do that, and Dan, please feel free to correct me if my recollections are inaccurate. Essentially, a critical issue for us is that the city, because of their knowledge, skills, and abilities associated with tunnel work and the connection, no pun intended, to Fleur Drive of the tunnel, really we have insisted that the city be a participant and step into the shoes of ultimate responsibility for letting the contract and for overseeing the construction of the contract. At the end of the day, the ultimate responsibility for maintenance, for the most part, still falls on Waterworks. Is untrue, Dan? I'm sorry.
On our end.
Go ahead, please.
It's mostly the city of Des Moines. We have very minor maintenance things that are ours. There's
Lights.
Lights, there's snow cleaning to get into the underpass and those kinds of things, but most of it is the city of Des Moines. There's very little that is ours. There's a little, but it's very minor.
Yeah, I would put it perhaps day-to-day maintenance. Much of the day-to-day maintenance will fall on us. The longer-term issues of life cycle and asset condition will fall to the city. Ultimately, no matter where it falls, the private money will be used, obviously, in terms of maintenance, not only for our day-to-day maintenance, but for longer-term issues associated with the structural integrity of the connector itself.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Any other discussion?
All I'd like to say is I'd like to thank you, Dan, for your work on this. In so many ways, you represented Des Moines Waterworks in this board and these negotiations, and I know it was a long process, and I just want you to know that we appreciate all of your work on this. It was heroic.
Let me say Michelle Watson over there in the corner deserves just as much of that, because I have to tell you, she and I at the last minute had to do a lot, but thank you, Michelle.
Absolutely, thank you.
To you.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you and everybody that was involved.
I appreciate one of the things that I think people, as we talk about going forward in maintenance, I know Jess has had some input as well in trying to talk about, making sure our design's correct so that we can clear that snow or when we do have flood events or otherwise that we don't have major ordeals taking care of it, as well as just nighttime, who's going to be there and coming in and out of the park and that access. There's been a lot of work for a number of years. This is something that's been planned and on the books, and there are a lot of great plans that are out there on shelves in different places. And it's kind of funny sometimes when I hear people talking about, well, this just came out of the blue, and it really didn't. This has been something that's been discussed for a long time, and as somebody who rode a bicycle through the park on Saturday, trying to access and get into the park and just have it not just be a kind of an eyesore trail, that it's going to be a nice thing, I think, for everybody here. I think employees that are here that take a noontime walk or have access to other places, and just the ambiance of the whole place, I think it's going to be a nice improvement, and I'm happy that all the work is finally coming forward.
Mark, would you mind sharing too, you were talking before the meeting about some of the information after the most recent ride that you were on and what you observed and then saw on social media with Jess here. I think it might be great timing.
Well, one thing, I was going to talk a little bit about the Park Foundation later, but Saturday I went on the mayor's bike ride for trails, ride and run, and we went through the park. There were many people out there looking for eggs. We don't know where these eggs are coming from. They look like a Fabergé laid them. So, but there were lots of people in the park enjoying that, even though weather was still a little bit chillier than we might hope at this time of year. There were many families that we could see out there all over the place, and I saw a lot of social media about that, and it brought people out. That's what we want, and it's nice when you have people out on trails and in places like that. It helps to decrease the need for security, frankly, because you got a lot of eyes keeping people away from doing stuff, and it brings activity. The other thing, I went to the bike races that were being held in the western end of the park, and riders asked me, and as I try to bring value to this place, I try to find some way I can be valuable in some way. They said, we just want to say thank you for whoever made sure that this surface is clean for us, because they're doing 25 miles an hour and going around corners, and it's important, and they appreciate that. So I want to pass that along and make sure that people understand that the users are noticing those things and do know that it takes effort and that it shows. So.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, and moving along to item 3C.
3C and 3D get a little more complicated because they involve actually the bidding process itself, significant, this is for the Phase 1 improvements, not for the Ruan connector, Phase 1 improvements within the park itself. And the bidding process really revealed a significant difference between estimates and actual bidding climate out there relative to the design that you approved for letting. This item 3B in particular squares off the ceiling that was in place under our earlier agreement at about $6.7 million and change with what, again, Dan and his staff, Don Staley, somebody else who needs to be included, I think, here in the circle of folks who are very much involved in discussions with the putative general contractor we'll talk about in item 3D. What we are asking as staff is to amend the existing agreement with the Park Foundation here to move the amount, the ceiling, if you will, up for the Phase 1 improvements. We'll talk about the Phase 1 improvements and the bidding climate a little bit more in item 3D. But this is the first amendment to your 2080, that is the Des Moines Waterworks 2080 agreement with the Des Moines Waterworks Park Foundation that really tries to reconcile the difference between estimates and an initial ceiling that was created with the ultimate bidding climate here. And just to state the obvious, this, like the Ruan connector, are largely funded. This in particular is funded entirely by private contributions. The Ruan connector, I think, is a little bit more complicated because of some city help with that project, but the $6.8 million here that we're talking about is, again, money that has been privately raised, but you as the owner of the ultimate improvement here really are in the driver's seat relative to the contracting process as well as the acceptance process. Happy to answer any questions you may have on item 3C, which is to reconcile the higher than anticipated bids with your initial agreement relative to a ceiling on those bids.
So we're looking for a motion to approve and authorize the chairperson to execute the First Amendment to the 28E agreement between Des Moines Waterworks and the Des Moines Waterworks Park Foundation for construction of Phase 1 park improvements, contingent upon approval of item 3B, which we have now approved, and 3D of this agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And 3D.
Happy to jump in here. This is the actual result of the bidding process. You'll see a wide range here. The estimate, to refresh your recollection here from RDG, the designer was about $6.4 million. You'll see that the results range from $8.1 million to $11.1 million. Ultimately, the staff recommendation is going to be for the general contractor, Tinkle Construction Company. The process of starting with base bid response that's essentially $1.7 million and $1.8 million above the estimates, and then getting it to an acceptable level is very complicated in terms of efforts between the designer, between the Park Foundation, Sam, and between our engineering staff. Ultimately, the outcome here ends up with a result of a base bid of about $6.2 million. All the alternatives, frankly, fall off the consideration because of the budget concerns, but you'll see here essentially a pretty good glomming among the responding bidders around the $8.1, $8.2 million amount, and certainly some outliers after that, particularly at the $11.1 million amount. But there have been a number of revisions in the design that you've approved for letting that get us down to the $6.7 million or so level, and they involve essentially 3 or 4 areas: some masonry work, the amphitheater itself, and the stage, if you will, have been changed substantially. There was a sculpture that has changed substantially, and then a canopy associated with the area just to the north of the levee here where the restroom would be. Some, I believe a little bit of trail work also has changed in that process. Needless to say, there have been some fairly significant changes in that process, but the staff recommendation is to accept the putative low bidder here at $8.1 million. Hinkle Construction Company that are out of Mason City. They have offices in Ames, done a number of projects for Iowa State University, but you'll note a very, very razor-thin difference between the base bid of Kester Construction, it's headquartered here, and Hinkle of about, roughly $5,000 out of what becomes an $6.8 million ultimate contract with this board. We'd be happy to try to answer any questions you may have. There's been a lot of discussion about efforts that have been put in. Certainly a lot of effort on the 28E involving the tunnel, the Rouen connector, but an awful lot of effort on this one from the gap between the assumed budget of about $6.5 million to initial responses back that are 22 or 23% higher than that. We've worked that process through, think we've put you in the position that you want to be as ultimate owners in that process, as well as squared it with our relationship and our agreement with the Park Foundation, but we're happy to answer any questions you may have on this.
Counselor, could you reread the recommended action? I think instead of from, it should be to, before we take a motion from the group. We have a not to exceed price, and I think our language there just needs to be slightly changed.
Sorry, which, for my benefit, Sue?
Yeah, under the recommended action, right here.
So are you talking about the change
And
order
price-
number one, changing the,
The project scope and price of the contract to instead of from.
No, I think
No.
that's correct.
it's from the 8 million to the 6.8?
Incorrect.
I think it's correct.
So that is correct.
Correct.
It's going to
You're
lower
reducing,
number.
you're reducing it from the
Got it.
8.1 to the 6.8.
I thought we were seeking permission to increase it to
No.
the
No,
bid amount.
No, I'm sorry. I probably wasn't clear on that. That was
No,
my
I-
fault, but the language I think here is reflective of our intention that you're essentially accepting an $8.1 million bid with contingencies to move that from 8.1 million to 6.8 through change orders.
Got it.
That staff is ready to execute.
Amount not to exceed that amount.
Perfect. Thank you. I just didn't want to get a motion and
It
then
is
have to modify
confusing.
the motion.
I appreciate that. It's confusing.
So I'm looking for a motion to award the Phase 1 Park Improvements contract for the base bid to Hinkle Construction Company in the amount of $8,105,597 and authorize the chairperson and CEO and general manager to execute the contract contingent upon execution of change order number 1, changing the project scope and price of the contract from $8,105,597 to an amount not to exceed $6,800,000, and contingent upon the approval of items B and C of this agenda.
So, second.
Okay.
I have one question, I
Okay.
think, may lead to another one, and maybe Sam can answer it. Is there, or I don't know, maybe Dan can answer it, an ongoing contract with RDG?
Yes.
Or when is that up for renewal?
It really isn't renewal. They have they are supposed to do the design, and they are jointly doing project management with our staff, and so their contract takes them through the construction of the Phase 1 improvements.
Right.
There is no other contracts that, between us and them, related to future work after that. Now, there may be someday, but there are none today. And I think the Park Foundation and the City of Des Moines will be entering a contract for them to design the Rouen connector. But that's not between the Des Moines Water Works and RDG.
That answers my question. So as the foundation contemplates Phase 2, then you would make a decision about whether they or someone else would be a part of that. That is my question.
I'm sorry, but to be clear, Graham, and I think it is clear, but just to emphasize it, the agreement that you have entered into with RDG in this circumstance is for design and construction phase services also.
Yes.
So
The normal terminus of that would be
At the end of
an
that.
acceptance of the improvements by this board.
Yep, I understand. Now, I'll just make, one comment. about this. I think this project would only happen in Des Moines. I mean, the fact that so many people got involved to make this happen, honest to God, I don't think it could happen in any other city.
That's a great statement.
I mean, it's fantastic.
I also want to say, personally, we're trying to do landscaping in a home, and we just that little project and trying to make the decisions and get that done. And then we saw the difference between one stone and the other for 180 square feet is $3,000. So,
So
thank you for.
Did you go with the Mexican pebble, whatever those are? Let me tell you, they're pricey. So I've made a mistake here by asking for a motion. So, Counselor, how do I hold on that while we open the public hearing?
I think we just need to go to a public hearing, and
Okay.
then before the vote's taken, we can.
Thank you. So I'm going to open a public hearing and ask if there are any comments from the public regarding the form of contract, plans, specifications, and estimated cost. We are going to close the public hearing. We have a finding there is no facility of this kind to be constructed that is available for rent or sharing from another agency.
That's
Is that
correct.
correct?
Dan is certified to that.
Now I'm looking for a motion to adopt the form of contract, plans, and specifications and estimated cost.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Bill has now reviewed the bids for us, I believe, and we have a motion on the table. Do I need to restate that, Counselor?
I would,
Yes.
award the Phase 1
Okay.
improvements.
So we have a motion to award the Phase 1 park improvement contract for the base bid to Hinkle Construction Company in the amount of $8,105,597 and authorize the chairperson, CEO, and general manager to execute the contract contingent upon the execution of change order number 1, changing the project scope and price of the contract from $8,105,597 to a not to exceed $6,800,000 and contingent upon the approval of items 3B and C of this agenda. Motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second. Any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? And Sam, is that the park on your tie?
That's going to be my hope. This actually is Central Park.
Okay.
It was bought by some friends who knew what we were working on here and said, someday this should be waterworks. So one day, Sue, I hope to have
Very
one.
cool. Very cool. Okay. All right. Moving right along, we have item 3E. Bill?
If I may, this is more in line with the types of public hearings you've managed and seen before. We have, between E, F, and G, we have 3 water main replacement projects here. We'll certainly start with E. The materials before you indicate, although we only had a single bidder to this water main replacement project, that the bid amount, including the alternatives, are substantially lower than our estimates and are with a company that we have worked with, and many of you are very familiar with their work on behalf of Des Moines Waterworks. Have done an excellent job. So the staff recommendation here, after you open the public hearing and skip the analysis of bids, which I've essentially done here, would be recommendation of a contract with Holbrook Construction for the Des Moines water main replacement contract 1 at a roughly $1.3 million.
Okay, I'm going to open the public hearing. Are there any comments from the public regarding the form of contract, plans, specifications, and estimated cost? Seeing none, we are closing the public hearing. I'm looking for a motion to adopt the form of contract, plans, specification, and estimated cost.
So moved.
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We have reviewed the bids, so now I'm looking for a motion to award the 2018 Des Moines Water Main Replacement Contract 1 to Holbrook Construction, Inc. in the amount of $1,284,555.70 and authorize the chairperson, CEO, and general manager to execute the contract.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item 3F, another public hearing.
In the public hearing, Des Moines Water Main Replacement Contract 2. You'll see in this particular case, we've had a number of different bidders here, including Holbrook, that you have just approved. But this is a situation in which we are recommending the base bid plus alternatives up to a point of about $1.6 million with on-track construction, the recommended bidder. You'll see, a pretty good parallel in the bidding process between two groups of bidders here, so that's always a good indication to us that we have a fair sense of where the market is. You'll note that our estimation here at the base bid is about $850,000. The low bidder here, base bid was actually Holbrook, but by the time we add the alternatives, there's significant savings by on-track. So our recommendation here, and the bid analysis that I'm providing you, somewhat out of order here, would be for on-track construction at $1.567 million approximately.
I'd like to open the public hearing, see if there are any comments from the public regarding the form of contract, plan, specification, and estimated cost. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. I'm looking for a motion for adoption of the form of contract, plans, and specification and estimated cost.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We've had a review of the bid, so now I'm looking for a motion to award the 2018 Des Moines Water Main Replacement Contract 2 to On-Track Construction, LLC, in the amount of $1,566,565 and authorize chairperson and CEO and general manager to execute the contract.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item 3G, another public hearing.
Another public hearing on a water main replacement project outside of the city of Des Moines and in Polk County, particularly in the northeast 14th area, where there are going to be significant DOT improvements associated with a widening project. In those situations, you know that we have an obligation to typically move our conveyance within the right-of-way, but in this case also it's an opportunity for us to replace a water main in an area that's created significant problems for water distribution crews over the years. Here, this is again separately funded from Des Moines Waterworks to our Polk County separately rated area. This is a situation where our estimate was not in sync, unfortunately, with ultimately where the base bids came out. $900,000, $905,000 roughly was our estimate. The actual base bid here is $1.35 million, but it's Raccoon Valley Construction, a company that, again, we have had significant experience with and recommend to you for ultimate approval of the base bid.
Okay, I'm going to open the public hearing and look for comments from the public regarding the form of contract, plans, specifications, and estimated cost. Seeing none, we will close the public hearing. Looking for a motion for the adoption of the form of contract, plans, and specification and estimated cost.
So moved.
And a second.
A second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Bill has reviewed the bids for us, so I'm looking for a motion to award the 2018 Polk County Water Main Replacement Contract 1 to Raccoon Valley Contractors, LLC, in the amount of $1,350,073 and authorize the chairperson, CEO, and general manager to execute the contract.
So moved.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 3H.
3H is our recommendation on a lease agreement for the property just immediately to our southwest. That's across Flight Parkway at the intersection of 30th and Flight Parkway. You may recall that we had a tenant there, Little All-American, that we terminated their lease at the end of 2017. Ted and his staff, Jessica and others were very much involved in issuing an RFP, I believe, in that circumstance, asking who would have an interest in it. They had 3 responses back. We essentially set the rent, if you will, in the RFP, $70 an acre, but wanted to hear the particular uses that the respondents would provide, and most important to us would be their maintenance plan for that particular property. And you'll see here that our recommendation is to move forward with a lease to Rails Football Club, who has very specific plans for that, all 14 acres. We could do it in a number of subsets, smaller than the 14 acres, but they want all 14 acres. And you'll notice the term of the lease here is a little odd. It's May 1 of this year through December 31st of next year, and that's really to put in sync with some of the work that we've done there, as well as the RFP process itself. Happy to answer any questions you may have about why they were chosen and what varying approaches here we use to make the staff recommendation. But it's, I think, important to note that the rent that you receive here, roughly $1,000 a year, is certainly small in comparison to the actual value of that property, but you have to factor in the great maintenance and the great maintenance that comes out of that. It's maintenance avoided for us, but also it's a great community outreach for this board into the community generally. Here we have 2 terrific tenants, as you know, further to the west in the park, who've done a number of great things for us and bring a lot of people through the Soccer South, Raccoon Valley clubs. This is another club to add to the portfolio should you choose to accept the lease here to the Rails Football Club.
So we're looking, yes, let's get a motion on the table, then we'll discuss if that's okay. So we're looking for a motion to authorize the CEO and general manager to execute the agreement for use and maintenance of Des Moines Waterworks property with Rails Football Club.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Dave?
Yep. Could you expand on that, what this group is, a little bit?
Ted?
They're a youth
You
football.
may want to go up there where he's got your mic. Ted.
The Rails Football Club is a youth football club. They sponsor a lot of tournaments, clinics where they teach kids how to play football, the fundamentals of football. They prepare them to play high school football. So it's a club very much like Soccer South is a soccer club, very much like Raccoon Valley Little League is a baseball organization. They're a youth football club.
Ted, you might want to mention for the benefit of the board what you and the evaluative committee saw in the responses here that led you to the conclusion that they were the right recommendation from the staff's perspective.
Absolutely. The primary thing, there's a couple of things. The fact that they wanted to use the entire property. We get maintenance avoidance out of these agreements that we have. That's one of the primary things. Also, the length of time and the amount of kids, the number of kids that they hope to engage in the process and the use of the property. We felt that their intended use was most compatible with our current and potential future use of the 3 respondents that we received, or the 3 responses. One of the proposals, they wanted to actually construct an indoor batting facility on the property, and that was really not compatible with our potential future uses of the property. So there was a little bit of a downside to that proposal, but the upsides were the fact that they want to use the whole property, the maintenance plan that they have in place, that we feel fairly comfortable. We'll present the property in the proper light in terms of being part of the Waterworks suite of agreements and a number of kids that can involve in the program.
One of the concerns that staff has certainly in the intermediate or long term for that property would be the potential that Flag Parkway might be relocated, and certainly having somebody invest in an indoor batting facility, only to have it destroyed or moved in process, we don't think would be in any of our best interests. So that certainly was a consideration. I'm confident in their review of the 3 respondents.
Absolutely.
And Rick has been very helpful on these and a number of leases that we're involved in. Obviously, we have cancellation provisions within the lease itself that allow us, if an unforeseen circumstance or reasonably foreseen circumstance comes up, like moving Flag Parkway, we're able to get out of the lease and move forward with supporting larger initiatives that may be part of the master plan of this board's concerns.
So you thought that was a successful way to decide on the lease, that it worked out okay?
I thought so, Dave. We consciously chose not to make the rent part of the proposal. So we have the criteria that are listed there in the memo. The maintenance plan was important to us, the intended use, the number of kids. I thought it was a successful approach.
Good.
The 3 responses were very responsive in terms of trying to define how they would maintain the property and how many kids and how long intended use. So I felt pretty good about it. The scoring was close, I will tell you that. But I think we ultimately got the right answer.
Good.
My thanks to Ted and Jessica and Chuck Christensen, I believe, were the 3 reviewers here. So thank you for your.
Any other discussion? Okay, we have a motion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed. Moving ahead to item 3I.
Another Phase 1 related detail here. No, I'm sorry, Phase 1 related. Dan's reminding me. As part of the relocation of water main here, a 16-inch water main that we have along Fuller Drive, we were required to get an easement from the city of Des Moines, particularly in the Grays Lake area. You'll note that the map that you have has some areas highlighted that are not part of the easement area. My apology for not picking up on that earlier, but this is an area, an easement area immediately across from us, Fuller Drive, in the park area that the city of Des Moines has granted us. So we would ask your acceptance of the easement from the city of Des Moines and allow us to execute the easement document.
So we're looking for a motion to accept the easement from the city of Des Moines and execute the easement document.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, or discussion? Looked like you were going to say something. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the next thing that we have is, at our last meeting, we had a presentation from the Botanical Garden, and we asked if anyone would be interested on the board of serving on the Botanical Garden Board. And so this agenda item is, I'm seeking a motion to appoint Board Member Graham Gillette to represent the Des Moines Waterworks on its behalf to the board of the Greater Des Moines Botanical Garden for the remainder of the calendar year for 2018.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Graham, your last chance.
I know, that's what I was going to say, last chance, right?
That's what I was just going to say.
Are you serious?
Peggy?
What are your qualifications?
I'm underqualified.
Okay, with that, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much, Graham, for doing that. Moving into our informational items, first we have, and many of these I know we've covered them or we may be discussing, but Planning Committee.
I'd say, Bill, do you have somebody from the staff that wants to explain the roofing a little?
I think
Or do you want
that
to?
we are not here to recall or to recap our facilities maintenance process involving the roofs. There was a pretty detailed discussion at the planning committee level about the condition of the many roofing systems we have and the importance of integrating that into our regular maintenance budget within the Des Moines Waterworks. So that was the presentation.
Basically, we're getting it all in one package of roof.
Roof review and
review
analysis.
yearly.
It was excellent.
Yeah.
Great presentation. Okay, anything, Finance and Audit Committee?
Finance and audit, we talked about the capital improvement plans, and the one thing that I'll just want to make sure is on every board member's radar screen is we discussed some concern about Moines Waterworks' ability to, plan for capital improvements as regional discussions continue. There's an unknown out there about what will happen with regional discussions, and that makes the staff's job difficult to anticipate choices that need to be made on that. I think that's a fair way to say that. I don't need to wade into that too deeply. It's a red flag that's out there that I think we all need to continue to monitor, and it's another reason why there's urgency when it comes to these regional discussions. Is that a fair way to say that, Sue?
And just for additional clarification, since Jason and Andy are both here and they'll be speaking to us later, when you are going out for bonding on additional projects, now that the way it was explained to us by Peggy is now that we are involved in these discussions, there is question from those that would be entering into a bond as to how does the entity exist? What is the future of the entity? So it was expressed to us the great need to continue down this path. I think you all know we're looking at an asset transfer as the model now, but should that not come to fruition, there was great discussion around the table that we are interested in regionalization, and we want to get to the numbers as quickly as we can for the suburban customers to better understand if this is something we all wish to pursue and then to move ahead. So I'm glad you brought that up.
And with that, I think we'll hold off on customer relations until...
Sounds good. Botanical Garden, anything? We had a great presentation at the last board meeting. And Des Moines Waterworks Park Foundation.
We passed all of our 20AD agreements at the meeting tonight. I think that's our big news for us.
Everybody found their eggs.
There's a big to-do about the eggs in the park I already talked about. That's just to get people aware of what's going on in the park and get folks out. That seemed to be very successful. We talked about having that as a possible annual event, and people had a lot of fun with that. I think, the report talks about we got another $500,000 donation. More money is coming in. It's good to show that we are getting things done as well for those folks. 3 or 4 years ago when we were talking about things and there were people waiting to donate money, it's kind of hard to say, I'm going to give my money to this project and we'll see what we're going to get for that. Now we see that we are getting things together, how the plans to come together, how the process works, and reiterate all the things we've said before, the staff, and invaluable information and insights on how to do some of these things and how to make things work when you can't quite find that way. There's a Rubik's Cube or a Tetris or some kind of a comparison, but not everything goes the way that you expect it to, and then you have to retrofit it. I think the biggest thing is that seeing Des Moines grow. When I graduated from high school in 1985, I did not see a way to stay in Iowa, and most of my classmates thought that their college choice was going to determine where they were headed in a career. There wasn't much to do. People drove around in circles downtown as entertainment, and we have so many more things going on economically, just culturally and otherwise, and this is part of it. Every great city needs great parks, and makes me really feel good to contribute to that. So,
thank you. Legislative update. Laura Sarcone, what is going on up at the Capitol?
We don't have time for that.
Well, it will be brief. As the memo stated in your packet, the 100th day of the session passed last week. That means the legislators' per diem has expired and they're working on their own dime. The top priorities still remain tax reform and budget bills. So we haven't seen a whole lot of movement on any other pieces of legislation because the leadership has been behind closed doors working on those two important pieces. our lobbyists have been having their ears open, and we'll be looking at the budget bills as they become available to make sure that nothing gets snuck in at the last minute that will be adversarial to Des Moines Waterworks, like has been done in the past legislative sessions. On a federal level, we are monitoring the reauthorization of Farm Bill. The current Farm Bill expires in September, and we're looking at specific provisions for source water protection and conservation practices within the federal Farm Bill. So we'll be monitoring that.
Thank you. And Laura has jumped into this role, and I see her all the time at the Capitol at partnership meetings everywhere representing us and doing such a great job. So thank you, Laura. Moving ahead, CEO and General Manager comments. Bill?
First, let me give you an update on the utility goals. You'll recall in the materials that you have has an update on this, but let me briefly refresh your recollection that we came into 2018 with 3 goals. One of them, the safety category, was essentially to significantly reduce from 50% of the injury average our OSHA recordables. We also had 2 other goals on disinfection byproduct compliance. That has been a problem for us. TTHM compliance has been a problem for us in the past, as you'll recall, and then an issue that's very much du jour for every business that I'm familiar with, at least, and that's cybersecurity. We have had success at the end of the first quarter on 2 of the 3 goals. The safety goal haunts us. We have not failed to reach the safety goal, but we are at the 50% of the injury average of injuries already at the end of the first quarter. So clearly the math there would indicate we are probably going to have a problem moving forward. We've had 6 recordable injuries. Ted and Brian Polpeter, who are responsible on our safety committee, certainly are working that through on a number of different levels. Ted, Chuck Christensen, and Dylan from our staff are also working through looking at the individual injuries, looking at what we think are the context of the injuries, but we're concerned about the number of injuries we've had this year. Fortunately, none of them have been terribly serious, but the numerics between very serious and not so serious still indicate, I think, a safety context that has us concerned. We're very pleased by last year's success with only 3 OSHA recordables, but we again have had twice that in only the first quarter of this year. So we're quite concerned about that. More notably, in terms of success, disinfection byproducts, Mike and his staff have been very heavily involved in working to make sure that we are using a number of mediation techniques and remediation techniques to reduce our disinfectant byproduct presence in our treated water, and have had great success along those lines. Pat Bruner and his staff on the cybersecurity front have been involved in a number of different initiatives. So again, safety is and should be, without regard to its short-term success or failure, our focus will continue to be our focus. We're pleased by the work that's happened with our production and lab staff on disinfection byproducts, and continue to believe that the cybersecurity issue, with all of its tentacles and ramifications, will be a significant issue for us. We will continue to put significant resources in cybersecurity concerns and have to date. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions on the goals. Otherwise, I'll pivot, as we now are saying on a more regular basis in our
Can I just ask
communications. Absolutely.
On the safety thing, the barn that I passed by as I drive in here, that we've talked about before, and there are issues, it seems. We talked about the upper levels and the animals that live there, and what that leaves, and what that might leave for employees that are coming in and out, as well as just the structure itself. Is that something that we might want to have a fuller report on at some point?
Mark, thank you for raising that. I know Jessica and her co-workers, who spend a great deal of time in and around the barn, have significant concerns, as does Ted and the operating staff, about the longevity of the barn. It's iconic, very popular with photographers, among others. as we've talked about, Mark. But realistically, I'll be looking to Ted and his staff to provide a plan for its removal probably in 2019. That will be something, obviously, that you as the board will want to review. It will be controversial and certainly raise a lot of public discussion, much like memorial trees, or at least in the same zone as memorial trees, perhaps. As I'm sure all of you are aware, rebuilding and replacing that within the flood zone will be a significant issue. We do not see doing that, but we obviously have a need for many of the functionalities associated with the barn. But the barn, in our view, creates significant risks for our employees and also long-term risks of fire and fire suppression. Having Des Moines firefighters responding to that blaze would be a foreseeable issue that I think we as a public owner in particular want to do everything we can to avoid. So we'll be talking with you in greater detail about that. I'll be looking to Ted to take the lead in putting together information and a time frame and budget relative to the removal of the white barn. We'll also be talking with the foundation, Mark and David, who have significant interests, obviously, in preserving that, not necessarily interests that are in agreement with, I believe, our responsibilities as owner of that property. One other issue that I just wanted to mention quickly under the general manager's comments. I know Kyle has mentioned it in a number of our internal communications. Our nitrate levels continue to ratchet up. I believe they're 11 in Sac City and 12 in Jefferson as we speak. So obviously we're reaching a level in the Raccoon River here in Des Moines that puts us back in a condition of concern about how we will denitrify and how we'll provide safe drinking water for our customers. Just wanted you to be aware of that. We have not begun to denitrify yet with the denitrification units, but I'm confident Kyle and his staff are looking at the timing for that and have done a number of preventative dry runs, maybe not so dry as Ted would say, involving the denitrification process to make sure that we're ready when necessary to formally denitrify with the ionization process. So just wanted you to be aware that we're approaching, unfortunately, that time where we have significant concerns about nitrate levels in the Des Moines and Raccoon River.
Thank you. Our next item, we have invited, after our last board meeting, all of you suggested that we should invite Jason Mumm, who has our contract through FCS, and he brought with him Andy. And I know that we have also shared with him a list of issues, I'll call them not concerns, but issues that have come forward at least from staff. And for Jason's information, we shared that list with the rest of the board and to ensure that we are giving a complete list of those items that we want to make sure are addressed in the phase 2. So we could, do we want to hand that out?
It's in your materials. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. But with that, we have invited Jason not to do a presentation, but just to come before the board to address any questions you may have, for us to review maybe the issues document that we've put together. I know we had an excellent meeting late yesterday with a number of individuals, the mayors for Central Iowa, many of the technical folks that are interested in the regionalization piece. And with that, Jason, welcome, and we're glad you're here, Andy.
Thank you. Joined by my colleague Andy Baker on the project. We did have the meeting yesterday. It was quite good. I would call it a kickoff meeting. We went through a recap of what we accomplished during phase 1, which is significant, and we talked a lot about what's coming up in phase 2, and went through task number 1, which is in progress right now, which is recovering information requests. 14 of them have been sent out to different communities across the region. We've got until May 4th to recover all that information. We talked about what those items were, time commitment involved in collecting them, and the people that we have on our team who are individually assigned to each of those communities to help them gather up that information. So it was a shorter meeting than usual. Say we finished ahead of our normal schedule, about an hour and a half, I suppose, yesterday. But I think it all went very well. We had a lot of positive comments afterwards, and understood you wanted to visit with me today, so I'm here to answer whatever questions you might have tonight. Happy to do that.
Sue, could I kind of lead off?
Sure.
Just a moment here. Jason, in the presentation yesterday, I think you now see this process as probably involved in 3 phases. You were under contract for the second phase of that. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the third phase, at least conceptually, and when you would see that coming to culmination, assuming that we remain on track with the asset transfer issue, which is an arguable assumption.
Well, I think the slides that were presented last night that spoke about a third phase were brought in from the members of the working group.
Yeah.
So they put those into the presentation and described the phase 3, but I think in general what that phase, in my mind, what phase 3 represented was once you get past the point of making a decision on the business case, there remains some things to be discussed yet, and I would call it maybe an implementation phase. I think I've referred to that before. It seems like that's consistent with what I saw from what was proposed as phase 3.
And based on your experience, assuming that the phase 2 process comes to closure late summer, early fall, whatever, September, the implementation process, as you've described it, how long do you think that would take to reach closure?
I think there's a couple of pieces when you consider implementation. You've got some implementation planning, which is, what are all the things that need to be done for implementation, and then execution. I think the planning phase probably could take you through the end of the year, assuming you're just clicking along on track like that. I think the execution could take you much longer. Could be 12 months to get the authority actually up and running and functioning as a business. Could take a while.
And I think you've been provided a draft copy of some concerns that certainly staff has focused on, and the board to some degree has, in varying methods or varying fora, at least raised some concerns. I know one of the concerns that I've heard pretty consistently from the board is what alternatives are out there, and how do we prepare ourselves for at least the possibility that the asset transfer process may not succeed? Are there concurrent paths that we should be approaching in this process, or is this all or nothing, at least in terms of exhaustion, and then looking at alternatives in the event it doesn't come to closure? How do you see that, Jason?
I think we're going into phase 2 with the vision that has been expressed by the working group towards this asset transfer and the construction of a regional authority that would basically own and contract out the operations for those facilities, and then be responsible for building new capacity and new facilities with water production in the future. For whatever reason, we were in a different place where that wasn't going to be the case. I think you have another scenario at that point that you have to look at in terms of the business case. But I'm sort of hesitant to say what exactly that would look like right now, because it hasn't really been expressed as a vision right now.
Just to be clear, I think one of the articulated concerns has been that the initial guiding principles certainly did not contemplate asset transfer, and there has been a departure from that among the working group. Certainly, I think there is some concern that this process started down a path very different from what we seem to be on now, so it would be foreseeable that perhaps that path will not be successful.
I suppose that's true. What I've seen so far is the working group at least made that call to explore that path and has seemed to coalesce around it. I think we're working under the right assumptions right now, but that's not to say those assumptions could change in the future. Wouldn't rule that out.
Then not ruling it out, is there any preparation that we should be involved in, as an example, as to alternatives?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. So our scope, I can comment on our scope and how that addresses all of this, which is we've got one alternative that's in our scope to evaluate and prepare to present to the work group and take a look at, and that involves the regional authority outlook that's been expressed by the group currently. If that were to change, and if it changes, soon enough, we can substitute it, and it wouldn't be any effect on our scope. If we get further on down the road and we change it sort of after the fact that we've already done the work and done the analysis on it, then we'd have to come back and take a look at doing that as another alternative. But that, I don't know any other way to address it than that.
I think it might be helpful for the board as a whole. Dave and Sue would have heard the discussion yesterday or been involved in actually the mechanics of the discussion. What I would see is a change in emphasis also in phase 2 that has, as an example, I think Mayor Andewig described it as a bifurcation of authorities here between the steering committee with the mayors and water board chairs, and then reliance on a technical committee, probably very similar to, if not completely coterminous with the CERDWIC technical committee, and then Sue perhaps commenting on an expansion of scope with FCS that will involve additional contributions from other communities relative to Jason's role with the technical committee and with the steering committee.
Yeah, there was thought, and this was brought together by the 3 water utility representatives and 4 mayors from Ankeny, Urbandale, West Des Moines, and Des Moines, that we could really have parallel discussions going on to better utilize the technical and financial folks that we have to talk about some of the elements. And I'll use as an example the operating agreement. I mentioned to Ted yesterday it would be great if we could have the technical and financial folks look, for instance, at what would be the right desired amount of time. 40 years may be too long for an operation contract, 4 years may not be enough. So if we could have the actual working groups that are part of the utility talk about those things and maybe make some recommendations to the steering committee, that would go a long way in the discussions that we have. And I want to be clear, because I know that there is also a technical committee of CERDWIC, but this idea came forward as, we have a lot of expertise in the room, and why not tap into that? So what Mayor Lorenz, who is from Ankeny, and as you know, right now the contract for Jason and FCS that we have is being covered by the 3 water utilities. He had proposed to the mayors to continue to have this technical committee with the oversight of Jason and FCS, but for those discussions then to be brought together so that we would all share the information, but that would not be an additional contribution from the water utilities, but rather from the other cities that would be involved. And I know that one of the things that Mayor Lorenz expressed to me was that he felt that this shouldn't just be on the water utilities. This should be in some of the communities that may not be served by a water utility, and that they need to, my words, not his, have some skin in the game too. And if they want to, kind of pay to play, I'll use the term to say we are very interested in being part of this, and we want to make sure that our communities fit into the discussions that are happening. So that was at the direction of some of the mayors to continue to explore that expertise that they have.
Jason, will you be working with the technical committee, much like you work with the steering committee, to determine the agenda that they'll be covering?
That's sort of my understanding. I think there's a need to determine what the agenda needs to be. Right now, I think that's a little bit open, but I've started putting together a document with some suggestions, not to say that those need to be followed strictly, but there are some things that were in the MOU as we left it towards the end of the year, towards the beginning of this year, that are sort of unresolved right now, and I think those need to be a priority for both the steering committee and the technical committee. So at least if we're handling those issues, I feel pretty good that we're working on the right things. I know that there's some others, and those can be identified by the members of those groups. happy to work with them on any of those issues that they bring up.
Just to provide a little bit of perspective, I'm confident that the technical committee would be benefited by your assistance in putting together agendas to make sure that they are operating in a way consistent with the steering committee and the larger objective here. Also, just to add in, and it's been alluded to, the CERDWIC group has an existing technical committee. It really will be up to the executive committee there as well as this technical group to work that through, but I would think it makes probably most sense to suspend that so there is not confusion as to who is doing what, when, and how. But there is already an existing technical committee that I think is probably viewed as a model for moving forward on this bifurcated path. But
You can't use that technical committee, you have to create a new one?
There's some members, Graham, who come to CERDWIC that are not necessarily involved in this. Indianola as an example. And I think there's probably a larger agenda item that I would have and have expressed at a number of different occasions to breathe new life into a smaller technical group. The CERDWIC group, the CERDWIC technical group under Ted's leadership, I think has done a great job, but we may have an opportunity to better hone what the mission is here. But there will be some short-term confusion among, I'm assuming that most of the members from Ankeny and Waukee and the usual folks who we're dealing with in these discussions of regionalization will have the same member, and I think that can create some short-term confusion about who's doing what and how, but simply taking the CERDWIC group and grafting it over, I think may cause some other confusion, just because there's some additional members there. Jason, I don't know if it would be helpful, I certainly take the direction from the board. You hopefully have a copy of the draft of a number of issues that a number of folks involved with Des Moines Waterworks have concerns with. I think from my perspective, looking at the scope of Phase 2, there's a great emphasis put on the economics of regionalization. We obviously view ourselves currently as a regional producer, and so many of the questions that you're answering we view as to some degree already having been answered and to the benefit of regionalization. So there are a number of kind of sub-issues that certainly are a concern for us as you continue to work through and facilitate with both the committees that seem to be emerging in this process. Happy to go through that, or follow the board's lead as to how to better facilitate discussion here to communicate with Jason concerns that you may or may not have about making sure that Phase 2 is tracking with the board's fiduciary responsibilities and policy concerns.
I think Phase 2 is going to address many of these, if not all of these issues. I think what I can commit to is, why don't I take these and make sure that each of them receives a deliberate written response as part of our work. And that way, I feel like we will at least have formally addressed and hopefully answered these well enough. And if not, we can continue to talk about them either in one of the two committees or here, if that's your preference.
I really have no strong preference other than to say I doubt that you're going to be confident responding to each of these. As an example, look at the very last one on debt defeasance. That really isn't an issue in your wheelhouse, at least I don't think it is, because it involves our particular relationship with our creditors and bond covenants as an example. It's a highly technical issue. But again, we want you to be aware of a number of these issues, even if you're unable to specifically resolve them.
And I would appreciate the time for you to look at this and think about it before you responded, because I think it would be unfair to say here off the cuff we'd like a perfectly crafted answer. And
No,
so
I think what I wanted to make sure happens is when we provide a written deliverable for you, that these specific questions are addressed. And that's really what I was referring to.
Yep, I understand. And I just want to clarify, Bill, I read in the Des Moines Register last month that talks had broken down, or that we had stalled on
that was an opinion piece, as I recall?
That was an opinion
piece. I just want to make sure I knew the source of that.
I just want to verify. It seems to me that my understanding, maybe I'm not fully informed, having gone to meetings and gone to these other things and seen these things, it seemed like we had to go through, because we had a contract with our guest on the first phase, and then we needed to go to the second phase, and we needed to renegotiate and go forward, but everybody was in agreement to do that. Is that your understanding?
That is my, certainly all the principals that were really involved in the discussions, I believe, had that agreement. Clearly, this was a private citizen who had strong but uninformed views about the status of the discussions.
And if somebody out there listening did want to know, are there places where they could find this information on the website or otherwise to
Absolutely.
hear what's going on?
Laura regularly posts governance information and discussion information relative to regionalization on the Des Moines Waterworks webpage. One can also go to Serdwick and I believe the West Des Moines Waterworks and Urbandale Urbandale Water Utility website. So there are a number of different locations for that information.
And frankly, this current iteration of regionalization is something that's kind of happened for the last 2 decades in discussion and agreements and other forms. Is that correct?
Yeah. I'm not sure I'm following the cross-examination, but I'll try here, Mark. Yes.
People have been trying to cooperate and work together for a number of years, right?
Yes, sir.
All right.
And as you know, this board has significantly invested in the Black and Beach study that went through elaborate detail and valuation on an asset transfer model and failed very recently within the last 3 years.
But Jason has certainly made himself available if you would like to have individual meetings with him, share information. We've had a number of conference calls with him, the 3 representatives of the water utilities, with relatively short notice to him as things have come up. So I'm sure he's happy to address any questions now, or if you want to do that, offline, feel free.
Jason, just one more consideration that I would throw into it, and I'm presumptuous in articulating this on behalf of the board, but ultimately, clearly Des Moines Waterworks and these trustees are responsible for the largest asset portfolio here in these discussions. Ultimately, they have to be accountable to Des Moines ratepayers who are the current owners of the assets. So there will be a number of considerations that are a little different for the 5 trustees versus other communities. And hopefully you'll have a sense of that as you look at the draft considerations issues.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's always been clear.
Thank you for coming in, both of you. So.
Yeah, happy to do that at any time at your request.
I think Graham has something.
I just want to underline something that Bill said at the beginning, and that is, there's some concern that the way that Phase 2 is structured, it's so focused on this asset transfer model that I have a concern that there's not a mechanism to consider other ways that we can regionalize, we can create regional governance. And so I want to encourage this board and the working group and FCS and everyone involved to continue to pursue ways to include and expand the discussion to those other models that may be out there for cooperation. I may be alone in my concern on this, but I feel that the mountain that is asset transfer is so steep that I am not confident we will ever climb it. And so it's important that, we, in my view, that we continue to figure out ways to pursue this discussion on asset transfer without limiting our discussion or brainstorming on other ways to reach cooperation.
Graham, I think we had a pretty good discussion last month about this, and I agree with you, and that was my concern, that we've gone off in a different tangent, that as people seem to volitionally misconstrue what we're doing, that if there's a failure to agree on asset transfer, that this entire project is done. And that's kind of the purpose of what we set out to do originally with the goals and the parameters that we set, was to say, that was a difficulty with Black and Beach, and we've not been able to do that, and there are so many, precarious things to deal with that, let's focus on this as our agreements and not the asset transfer. So my caution and what we talked about last month is that I want everybody to understand that we're trying we can do this without asset transfer. There are other ways. We saw that path and discussed that path. We have discussed entertaining the notion of asset transfer at the request of some of the entities involved, but that we shouldn't lose focus on that if we're not able to figure that part out. We can do this in a different way. So.
Fair enough. Just for what it's worth, didn't expect that turn would be made during the process during phase one. I think there was a lot of interest behind it, and there are people coalesced on it. But like I said, that's not to say that it's the only way. I think it's the way that you're hearing that the work group really would like to see it formed. That's what informed how we drafted our phase two scope. But if it turned out where we wanted to go a different direction, maybe we need to amend that and go a different direction. So I don't rule that out, but this is the way we're headed out right now. We get down the road and it's decided that we need to go in a slightly different direction, we can do that.
And if I may, Jason, just to emphasize one thing that I think Sue brought up earlier, the uncertainty surrounding when this comes to closure creates issues that you even touched on yesterday. The 2020 projection for the need to produce water is very real, and we cannot turn around that construction, make it happen with the time that we have today, let alone the compressing time that we're talking about here in dealing with governance issues. And also from a creditor standpoint, there is significant uncertainty about what the governance structure will look like and what the remaining portion of Des Moines Waterworks as potentially just a distribution company will look like for purposes of revenue bonding. So a lot of these uncertainties linger out there and are having real consequences on constructability issues, as well as our ability to go to the markets to seek indebtedness to finance them.
Understood.
Anything else? Okay, thank you. I believe that's our final item. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.